Dubai has fallen, buried beneath endless sand in the wreckage of good intentions. Captain Martin Walker leads his men into the ruins, searching for survivors or salvation. Instead, they find echoes, ghosts, lies. Each step deeper into the city peels away another layer of truth, until nothing remains but guilt and gunfire. Orders blur, enemies shift, every bullet fired redraws the line between hero and monster. This is the complete story and lore of Spec Ops The Line, a descent through illusion, duty, and the cost of insanity. Little is known about Dubai in the world of Spec Ops The Line, but it's safe to assume its history largely mirrors that of the real world, up until the events of circa 2012. 6 months before the events of the game, a catastrophic sandstorm, the likes of which have never been seen before, engulfed Dubai, burying much of the city and killing thousands. According to tapes from the radio man, Dubai's wealthy elite and foreign expatriates secretly evacuated the city 2 days before the storm was reported, abandoning the general population to die. To conceal their escape, they executed foreign aid workers and manipulated media coverage to maintain the illusion that evacuation was still possible. In the aftermath, the surviving citizens became refugees, trapped in the ruins of the city. Following their tour in Afghanistan, the U.S. Army's 33rd Infantry Battalion, led by Colonel Konrad, volunteered to assist in the evacuation of Dubai. At first, their efforts were focused on extracting civilians trapped by the storm, but as the conditions worsened, escape became impossible. U.S. Central Command eventually ordered the 33rd to withdraw from the city, but Konrad refused, choosing to remain behind and continue aiding survivors. His defiance led the United States to officially disavow the entire battalion, while the UAE declared Dubai a no-man's land, sealing off all contact with the outside world. Cut off from command and trapped behind the storm wall, the 33rd quickly found themselves in a desperate situation. Resources dwindled, infrastructure collapsed, and chaos spread amongst the refugees. In an effort to restore order, the 33rd imposed martial law, executing looters, rationing supplies, and brutally suppressing dissent. This led to a fracture within the battalion. Those still loyal to Konrad became known as the Damned, while the rebels who opposed him, largely composed of the original command staff, were branded the Exiles. Civil war erupted within the city. Despite support from many refugees, the Exiles were ultimately overpowered by Konrad's loyalists. The surviving mutineers were executed and their bodies put up on display publicly as a warning against insurrection. The internal war left the battalion fractured, demoralized, and surrounded by hostile civilians. Seeking redemption, Konrad organized one final evacuation attempt, leading a massive convoy of soldiers and refugees through the storm wall. The effort, however, ended in catastrophe when another sandstorm consumed the convoy, killing over 1,300 people. The survivors staggered back to the ruins of Dubai, broken and enraged. Tensions between the remaining 33rd and the surviving civilians grew volatile, and the city descended further into madness. Before their defeat, members of the Exiles had trained and armed segments of the refugee population, sparking an insurgency that harassed the 33rd from the shadows. Yet after months of bloodshed, a fragile ceasefire was shakily established. Around that time, a CIA unit codenamed Grey Fox covertly entered Dubai. Little is known about the full history of the CIA's involvement in Dubai, but Grey Fox was deployed to investigate potential survivors in the post-storm city. The unit included agents Castavin, Daniels, Gould, and Riggs, leading the bunch. Grey Fox initially assessed the state of the city under the 33rd's control and dispatched Agent Daniels to report findings and receive further instructions. However, Grey Fox's true objectives were far darker. Their plan included sabotaging the city's water supply to kill remaining inhabitants and erase evidence of Konrad's crimes, a measure intended to prevent a catastrophic geopolitical fallout that could have triggered a massive escalation in the war in the Middle East. It is worth noting that it remains uncertain whether this plan originated from the CIA or was the result of rogue actions by Agent Riggs. At some point, Daniels was captured and tortured to death, with his burnt corpse being left as a warning to any other agents. Meanwhile, Grey Fox began arming more and more disillusioned civilians, effectively creating a local insurgency against the 33rd's martial rule and sparking renewed conflict across the city. The CIA then established a base of operations at a location known as the Nest. Roughly 5.5 months after the failed convoy, Konrad made one final broadcast, a message of confession and despair that was eventually intercepted by U.S. Central Command. Overcome with guilt, Konrad took his own life, leaving command to the battalion's embedded civilian radio operator, Robert Darden, known to survivors as the Radio Man. In response to Konrad's transmission, Central Command quietly deployed a 3-man Delta Force reconnaissance team led by Captain Martin Walker, a former subordinate of Konrad. Unaware of the true scale of the disaster, their mission was to locate survivors and confirm the colonel's status. The game opens as Captain Walker, Sergeant Lugo, and Lieutenant Adams trek through the storm into the outskirts of a half-buried Dubai. Soon, they encounter armed survivors, insurgents locked in conflict with remnants of the damned 33rd. The insurgents have captured a squad of 33rd soldiers and taken them to a ruined hotel called the Nest. As Delta moves deeper into the city, they uncover fragments of Dubai's collapse. Learning about the failed evacuation, Konrad's attempt at restoring order, and how they became an occupying force. At the Nest, Delta witnesses 33rd loyalists rounding up refugees. Attempting diplomacy, Walker's team is mistaken for CIA operatives and a firefight breaks out. The 33rd suffers heavy casualties and retreats with civilian prisoners. Shaken by killing fellow Americans, Lugo and Adams argue to pull out and contact command. Walker refuses, determined to find Konrad and evacuate survivors. Delta learns that CIA agent Thomas Daniels has been captured by the 33rd. The radio man airs his interrogation live, letting Lugo trace the signal. When Delta arrives, they find Daniels' mutilated corpse. The broadcast was bait for another agent, Rick Gould. Gould's insurgents rescue Delta from an ambush but are slaughtered soon after. Here the player can choose to save Gould or nearby civilians, but regardless of their choice, Gould dies either way. But his body carries intel pointing to the Gate, a fortified 33rd stronghold. Believing Gould meant to assault the base, Walker leads an attack, only to find an entire company defending it. Near an abandoned mortar loaded with white phosphorus, Lugo protests using it, knowing its horrific effects. Walker instead overrules him. The strike annihilates the 33rd force, and as Delta walks through the aftermath, a dying soldier tells them the 33rd only wanted to help. Inside the blast zone, they find dozens of civilians, women, and children burned alive. Gould had only sought to free them, not seize the Gate. Walker deflects the guilt, blaming the 33rd in pressing on, while Adams and Lugo grow visibly shaken. Soon after, Delta discovers Konrad's executed command staff in a radio used to communicate with someone claiming to be Konrad. The colonel begins taunting Walker over the airwaves, questioning his morality. When they reach a bridge, Konrad presents 2 captives, an Emirati civilian who stole water and a 33rd soldier who killed the civilian's family, enforcing the law. Konrad orders Walker to execute one of them. The player can shoot either man or attack the snipers above, but regardless, Lugo and Adams begin doubting Walker's sanity. Convinced Konrad is in the Dubai Seaside Tower, the city's tallest structure, Walker presses forward. Along the way, Delta encounters CIA agent Jeff Riggs leading a raid on Dubai's last water supply beneath the aquatic coliseum. Riggs claims seizing the water will cripple the 33rd and end the fighting, but when their trucks become trapped, he intentionally crashes them, destroying the city's water reserves. Mortally wounded, Riggs confesses he manipulated the insurgents. He wanted Dubai to die of thirst to keep the 33rd's crimes secret, preventing a regional war that he believed the US couldn't win. Here, the players can choose to kill Riggs or leave him to burn alive. With Dubai doomed, Delta heads to the Trans-Emirati building to stop the radio man's broadcasts. As they ascend, the team becomes increasingly unstable and Walker suffers from vivid hallucinations. They find the radio man unarmed and compliant, but Lugo executes him anyway, claiming he'd never let them leave alive. The 33rd assaults the building as Walker broadcasts a plea for evacuation. Adams hijacks a Blackhawk, and the team attempt to escape but crash in the process. After the crash, Adams finds Walker and reports Lugo is missing. Walker and Adams fight through hostile territory to reach Lugo, who's been captured and lynched by enraged civilians, blaming the Americans for the city's destruction. Walker is too late and fails to save Lugo. Enraged, Adams asks for permission to fire on the mob. Once again, the player is given a choice: kill the mob or scare them off. Only Walker and Adams remains as they advance towards the seaside tower. Walker's delusions worsens. Adam openly blames him for everything, but still follows his lead. Surrounded by the 33rd's last forces, Adams sacrifices himself so Walker can reach the tower. Exhausted and half delirious, Walker enters to find the remaining 33rd surrendering to him. They lead him to Konrad's penthouse. There, Walker attempts to confront the colonel until he discovers Konrad's decayed corpse on the balcony. Turns out, Konrad's been dead for months, and the Konrad Walker had been speaking to was nothing more than a hallucination, a projection of Walker's own guilt and rationalizations. The imagined Konrad tells Walker he continued the mission not to save lives, but to prove himself a hero. To cope with his atrocities, especially the white phosphorus strike, Walker twists reality. blaming Konrad for his own crimes. Had Delta left the city early, everything might have been avoided. The illusion Konrad forces Walker to make one final choice: accept responsibility or deny it. There are 4 endings, with 6 possible outcomes. If Walker lets Konrad shoot him, or shoots his own reflection, he commits suicide. His body is found beside Konrad's, as the Colonel's old broadcast plays over the ruins of Dubai. If Walker shoots the hallucination of Konrad, the vision dies, telling him he can still go home. Walker calls for extraction, and in the epilogue, an army convoy finds him sitting in the desert, wearing Konrad's uniform and holding a shotgun. The player can either lower the weapon or open fire. Choosing to fight triggers a brutal firefight, and surviving leads to Walker radioing command and saying,
"Gentlemen, welcome to Dubai,"
before walking back to the ruined city. Dying during the fight shows Walker bleeding out, recalling a memory where Konrad told him men like them could never truly go home. If Walker surrenders peacefully, the soldiers evacuate him. One remarks they've seen his handiwork across the city. When asked how he survived, Walker replies,
"Who said I did?"
Instead of doing a typical analysis here, I'm going to pivot to something else. If you're looking for my analysis of this game, then head over to my main channel where I break down Spec Ops The Line from its development, its meaning, and everything in between. Here, however, I would like to talk about some theories I had while researching this game and the overall implied lore of the world. Let's start by zooming out. The game kind of implies a world that is already unraveling before Dubai fell. The storm is described as an unprecedented meteorological event. This could hint at it being possibly climate-related or, stick with me here, even man-made. What's even stranger is that nobody really cares. Like, think about it. Wouldn't there be truckloads of UN troops flooding into Dubai to help the refugees, or maybe another country lending aid? But no, it's just the US, but not really because the 33rd went AWOL. So not even the US is there officially. Even the UAE government disappears from the story entirely. The entire city is just left and abandoned completely. And this isn't just a little podunk city. This is Dubai. It's one of the wealthiest, most strategically significant cities on the planet. It's an economic powerhouse and global trade nexus. The city sits on the Persian Gulf, right along one of the busiest maritime routes in the world. Oil may have built its foundations, but by the 2000s, Dubai had diversified into finance, tourism, real estate, and global logistics. So for the UAE, a federation of immensely wealthy Gulf states with one of the highest GDPs per capita on the planet, to just abandon its flagship metropolis is outright insane. It'd be the equivalent of New York City or Tokyo vanishing overnight and the world collectively pretending it didn't happen. And if this game is taking place around 2012-ish, Dubai had already rebounded from the 2008 financial crash and was aggressively positioning itself as a global hub for tourism, finance, and trade. So losing that city wouldn't just hurt the UAE, it would rattle global markets. Billions in international investment would evaporate. Oil prices would skyrocket, markets would crash, and the entire Gulf region would be destabilized. Every world power like the US, China, Russia, etc. would have a stake in stabilizing it. Yet none of that happens. No UN relief effort, not even a regional response from neighboring Emirates. And that silence suggests a world either in chaos, censorship, or denial. It also suggests that something far bigger than a sandstorm is being covered up. So this all begs the question, what the hell happened? Let's start with the obvious but most grounded idea. The massive sandstorms were the result of climate collapse. The world of Spec Ops The Line might simply be one that ignored every warning. The Gulf region has always been teetering on the edge of being uninhabitable. Rising global temperatures would make Dubai's already arid environment exponentially harsher. As polar ice caps melt and ocean currents shift, global wind patterns would grow unstable, turning sandstorms from rare phenomena into sustained atmospheric events. What would typically last hours could now last weeks or months. A single massive storm cell caught between pressure systems could form a near permanent wall of dust, suffocating the city. And if this was climate-driven, it explains the apathy. The world might have ignored Dubai because it was happening everywhere. Refugee crises, failing nations, coastal flooding. By the time Dubai fell, the world might have already been drowning in its own disasters. The city's death wouldn't be an anomaly, just another casualty in a century of slow-motion collapse. Or, more interestingly, the unprecedented meteorological event isn't a natural disaster. It's the result of geoengineering gone wrong. By 2012, real-world scientists were already experimenting with weather modification, from cloud seeding to ionospheric manipulation. If you scale that up, say a regional climate control experiment meant to combat desertification or regulate Gulf temperatures, it could have destabilized atmospheric conditions and triggered the storm wall. This could even tie into the overall global climate crisis. The climate is getting so bad that countries are now experimenting with technology in order to stabilize regions. But whoopsie, we created a superstorm. This would then lead to a cover-up. Imagine a US or Emirati joint project to manipulate weather that went catastrophically wrong, burying an entire metropolis. The CIA's Grey Fox operation makes it clear that the US knew what was happening and chose containment over rescue. If Konrad's Rogue 33rd uncovered evidence of US involvement, say that the storm was made by man, then the logical response is to erase all witnesses. That means no UN intervention, no media coverage, and no international aid because the entire world was told not to look. But even if the storm was an accident and was man-made, that still doesn't change the fact that the city falling is still left completely ignored by the rest of the world. And that fact alone also plays heavily into the idea that there is already an ongoing climate catastrophe. Again, the total lack of response might mean the world itself is in crisis. Economic collapse, wars, the massive climate catastrophe, mass unrest. I mean, think about how odd it is that Konrad was able to convince nearly an entire battalion to go AWOL. That could mean upwards of 1,000 soldiers choosing to reign under a de facto dictator rather than go home. Now, with the idea that there might not be such a good home to return to, that kind of makes things make more sense and explains why they really didn't try too hard to leave. It's easy to focus on the human side of the story, but maybe the real story is the storm itself. If we take the game's timeline at face value, this isn't just a freak sandstorm. It's as if nature itself has turned hostile. It suggests that this wasn't bad luck, but a symptom of a planet pushed past its equilibrium. This world might not be politically fractured, it could just be ecologically doomed, which raises a terrifying possibility. Maybe Dubai didn't fall because of human cruelty or incompetence, but because the environment finally collapsed faster than civilization could respond. Whatever the truth may be, the world beyond the storm is darker than anything Walker found inside of it. Whether it was corruption, catastrophe, or divine punishment, Dubai didn't fall. It was erased. And maybe that's the real horror of Spec Ops The Line. Not that the city died, but that the rest of the world just let it.